You've been lied to about UFOs, or so the old standard claim goes. If you've dabbled in the UFO topic even just a little, you've likely come across claims asserting some grand, long-standing lie typically attributed to the U.S. government. Have we been lied to about UFOs? Let's discuss that.
Is it UFO or UAP? The government's confusing me. The experts make it complicated. Lack of answers has me jaded. UFO, I don't know. UAP, yeah, I guess so. Searching for answers, where to begin? Round and round in circles again. Thunderstruck by mass confusion. Is it fact or fiction? Convolution. UFO, UAP, which is right idiomatically. Just my luck now, I'm stuck. Scratch my head and say, yeah, what the fuck? UFO or UAP, it's all so confusing to me. Beyond frustrated, damn my luck. Pondering insane thoughts, what the fuck?
Hello, citizens, and welcome to UFO, UAP, WTF. I'm your host, Jason McClellan, and together we'll be exploring the fascinating, enigmatic, and frustrating subject of UFOs. We talk about lots of recurring themes on this show because, as I frequently like to point out, things that happen within the UFO community are cyclical. UFO history perpetually repeats itself. Much of what we hear discussed in today's discourse about UFOs is remarkably similar to UFO discussions from the 1960s, and the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s, and so on. I'm sure some of this is due to unscrupulous individuals simply recycling tropes from UFO lore in order to wow and impress new audiences unfamiliar with such lore. But I suspect the largest culprit is simply humans being humans. And yeah, I know unscrupulous humans using hype and sensationalism for personal gain isn't uncommon in human behavior. What I mean by humans being humans is simply this: we humans are incredibly flawed. The reason most UFOs are eventually identified as mundane objects is because humans are humans. The notion of reality is individual to us all, and we form that vision of reality based on our individual life experiences. If I see an odd-looking, elongated, and illuminated object that appears to silently hover in the sky, then makes slow, controlled motions, I might think, that's strange, even alien. It's outside my personal life experience, so it doesn't make sense to me. But if I've seen the Goodyear blimp in flight before, and I saw the same object in the sky, I might assume it's a blimp, because I have that life experience that helps me make sense of what I encounter in this game of life. We're seeing many tropes from UFO lore re-emerging right now, and, not surprisingly, being excessively forced into current UFO discourse. And this notion that you've been lied to is a big one. The United States government has always played the villain in the world of UFOs. This idea that the government actively covers up UFO events and information is an old standard in the UFO community and in pop culture overall. And in recent years, we've entered this bizarre era where the government says that the government is lying about UFOs. But what is this lie that we've supposedly been given? That's rarely clear or articulated, but the usual idea here is to suggest that the US government has continually told us that UFOs don't exist when in fact they do. The problem with this notion is that the US government has always had the official position that UFOs are real. The government even went so far in their earliest official UFO study to state that the likeliest explanation for some UFOs was extraterrestrial spacecraft. And in all of the recently issued government UFO reports, they clearly state that UFOs are real. So anytime I hear people on their soapboxes screaming about this big government lie, this assertion from the government that UFOs aren't real, it immediately gives me pause. And it's a red flag that leads me to wonder if the individual making that claim is being intentionally deceptive to cater to an audience of hungry people desperate for answers, or if that individual is simply operating with an incorrect and misinformed understanding of the situation. There have always been individuals, teams, groups, organizations that push a need to inform the world about the UFO reality. But what is the UFO reality? I frequently state that researching UFOs is an individual pursuit. It really is. Like anything else in life, we all form our own opinions and views. This is certainly true when it comes to UFOs. And something important to keep in mind is that few people share all the same views, opinions, and beliefs when it comes to UFOs. So UFO truth is extremely subjective. Forcing one's personal beliefs on the rest of the world is problematic, and it pushes UFOs into religion territory. Sure, belief is central to much of this topic, but again, that belief is different for everybody. People who tend to get fired up and feel an intense urgency to reveal the UFO reality to the public typically fail to understand that much of the general public is still of the mindset that UFOs aren't real. And by that, I mean most in the general public don't believe that there could possibly be objects in our skies that officials aren't aware of and can't identify. And when most of what the loud and proud UFO personalities push as gospel to convert the masses are simply statements made as fact without the proof to back those up, again, this becomes akin to cult leaders, attention-hungry social media personalities, and even politicians who create the impression of importance and play to people's emotions to push specific narratives, all without proof, and many times in direct conflict with the reality of the situation. We already discussed a perfect example of this, the claim that the government says UFOs aren't real, when, in fact, it has repeatedly and plainly stated that UFOs do exist. We've talked on previous episodes about all the interest in the topic of UFOs at the congressional level lately. And related to that, we've discussed the many problems with how these interested members of Congress discuss UFOs, and how they're no different from you and me. They're fascinated by the subject just like we are. They have their individual beliefs about this stuff just like we do. And like many of us, most of what they know about UFOs is informed by lore. The people briefing them about UFOs simply regurgitate lore and essentially work to indoctrinate these folks, simply using the same unsubstantiated lore that drives their personal beliefs. We now find ourselves in this odd time and space where we have elected officials holding hearings and press conferences and making media appearances to discuss the UFO topic. But rather than providing voices of reason, encouraging logic and data-driven determinations, and reducing the stigma associated with this topic, these public figures are doing the opposite. They're throwing fuel on the stigma fire, doubling down on UFO lore, and actively supporting the notion that the government lies about the existence of UFOs. It's still so completely bizarre to me that absolutely everybody, including our elected officials, have adopted the persona of a wannabe teenage social media influencer. Positions that once required professionalism, decorum, and tact have devolved into personal brands focused on fighting for attention and celebrity status. Representative Anna Paulina Luna recently spent days hyping up a press conference that would, quote, impact the entire nation, end quote. The press conference took place on February 11th, and it was held to announce the creation of a task force within the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform called the Task Force on Declassification of Federal Secrets. And this task force has been formed specifically to try to declassify information related to a handful of specifically named things, including the JFK assassination, COVID-19 origins, 9/11, UFOs, and extraterrestrial life. This task force sent letters to various stakeholders, including the directors of the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, the Pentagon, and so forth. The unfortunate grouping of UFOs with these other topics aside, these letters are another prime example of the problem that current UFO discourse has created. These letters specifically ask for briefings about documents these various agencies might have in their possession, quote, regarding the existence of unidentified anomalous phenomena, end quote. That's a non-issue at this point, right? I mean, as we've already covered, the existence of UFOs isn't a question, and it hasn't been one for a long time. The government has repeatedly stated that UFOs are real. We know they exist. So continuing this faulty rhetoric keeps UFOs stuck in the mud. This task force will reportedly review any documents they receive, and they'll determine if they should be declassified. But another thing I love mentioning frequently is that it's highly unlikely that any UFO-related document is going to provide any useful information that we don't already have. The US government and governments around the world have released countless UFO documents. And most people, including UFO researchers, never bother to read through those documents. And that's okay, because frankly, there isn't much to glean from such documents. You might read some cool information from a reported UFO incident, or read some correspondence from random government folks that mention the word UFO, but that's all one should really ever expect from government files. But that isn't stopping politicians from using the UFO topic to bolster support under the guise of transparency and truth. Because belief plays such a big role with UFOs, it's not surprising that religion is frequently discussed in the context of UFOs. We commonly hear conversations about the possibility that some UFOs could be demons, or some UFOs could be angels. A standard trope from UFO lore is that the government covers up the existence of UFOs because revealing such knowledge would cause religions to collapse. I think it's fine and even responsible to consider angels and demons as possible identifications for some UFOs, because when we're dealing with unknowns, objective research remains open to all possibilities. But the notion that knowledge of UFOs will topple world religions has always been odd to me. Higher beings, visitors from elsewhere, are central to most religions. Angels, demons, gods, these all fit within the current trend for how people refer to aliens: non-human intelligence. Religion is based on and driven by the belief in non-human intelligence. The problem of conflating UFOs and aliens aside, this religion issue is just another example of a common talking point within UFO discourse that is a non-issue that only serves to unnecessarily complicate and convolute the UFO discussion. This just scratches the surface of all the problems related to how we talk about UFOs. And I know it's pessimistic, but I don't see UFO discourse ever improving. Humans will always be humans. Hype, hope, and blind faith will always be there. And so will lore that takes on a life of its own. Do governments tell us absolutely everything related to UFOs? Of course not. When dealing with government and military, secrecy will always exist, and for good reason. So any and all UFO information that comes from the government is going to understandably be controlled and sanitized. The same is true for any future UFO files or information published under the claim of truth and transparency. Getting people to understand that there isn't some cohesive UFO phenomenon would dramatically improve UFO discourse. All UFOs are different and require evaluation independent from other incidents. The government isn't a single cohesive entity. That's another important key that needs to be emphasized. Mixed messaging about UFOs is a common occurrence from different governmental groups, departments, agencies, etc. This shouldn't be surprising. Governments are composed of countless groups, departments, and agencies, and as concerning as it is, lack of interagency communication is a long-standing and well-known issue. Different groups do different work. They have different knowledge, and they have different ways of storing and reporting that knowledge. In fact, that was one of the primary reasons and objectives that drove the US government to form its current official UFO project, to improve interagency communication and data sharing. And it's often communication issues, or lack of communication, that fuels claims of a government cover-up. Individuals love to read between the lines or interpret government communication, or lack thereof, as proof of a cover-up. In most cases, this is simply an issue of the answer I got versus the response I wanted. UFOs are hard. We could make this subject less convoluted if we all honestly communicated about this topic rather than choosing hype, fear, and lore-based sensationalism. And if leading voices in the UFO community provided fact-based education rather than lore-based indoctrination, the UFO conversation might progress beyond where it's been since the 1940s. But until significant change happens in the way we all talk about UFOs, the topic of UFOs will keep spinning around and around. But that, my friends, concludes our episode for today. As you pursue your UFO research, do what works for you, but consider my 5 recommendations to guide your UFO research quest. Always treat the UFO subject with the cautious and responsible skepticism it deserves. Question everything. Have the courage to form your own opinions. Keep truth as the focus of your quest, even if the truth conflicts with your opinions, and be open to modifying those opinions as you consider new information. And finally, don't be a dick. If you're interested in staying up to date with the latest UFO information, we have a UFO newsletter. It has the same name as this podcast, UFO, UAP, WTF. This free weekly newsletter covers the latest UFO-related news, research, events, and more. You can subscribe at UFOUAPWTF.com. I'm Jason McClellan. Thanks for hanging out today. Join me again next time as we try to figure out together what the f*** is up with these UFOs.
UFO